The future of football has never looked more uncertain. The coronavirus lockdown has meant the world's most popular sport is in its longest hiatus since the Second World War. Leagues have been cancelled, seasons on hold, and any prospect of live football in the short term looks certain to be behind closed doors. But one of the biggest talking points about the future of the game is money. In football's absence, club finances have taken a hard hit. Some clubs have furloughed non-playing staff, and other teams' players and coaches have taken pay cuts. So, what will happen to the transfer market? In the 2019 summer window, €5.5 billion was spent across Europe's Big Five leagues, and yet no one came close to the record set by PSG when they spent €222 million on Neymar. So, in a post-COVID world, will that record ever be broken? As part of the Future of Football series, Goal's Liverpool correspondent Neil Jones has been investigating the impact coronavirus and the resulting lockdown has had on the transfer market. First of all, I know you've spoken to a lot of experts in the game. What's been the general consensus? Because we have seen a lot of transfer speculation in spite of the lockdown. Are people still expecting to see those marquee signings this year?
Yeah, I think teams that are in the strongest positions prior to COVID are in an even stronger position, relatively speaking, than they were before, because obviously they're the ones that have got the protection of vast revenues. They're the ones that have got, cash reserves, not as big as, a lot of people seem to think with football clubs. That I wouldn't say football clubs are cash rich. They're obviously good on the balance sheet and that kind of thing. But the clubs that are in the Champions League, for example, that have got years and years of sustained success and profit in that regard, they're in a far healthier position than clubs further down the ladder. The ones that are maybe, I'll take an example, maybe someone like Everton and Leicester, who were spending big money to try and jump into the Champions League prior to COVID, obviously, without the revenues that have been generated over the previous years from Champions League money, from overseas TV rights in that regard. I think that they'll find it a little bit more hard-hitting than maybe, say, a Manchester City or a Real Madrid or a Bayern Munich who are used to that level of competition and that level of revenue.
Thinking about it as well from a social perspective, there's been an awful lot of talk recently about the money in the game, and I think the situation has brought it home to people how astronomical some of these fees are. Are we heading towards a climate where execs might not want to be seen to be spending huge sums of money when there are so many people that are suffering and dying?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one thing that come across, speaking to people from clubs especially. There's a PR issue at play as well, where, we're seeing the headlines, and albeit, we're seeing maybe the curve starting to go that way in regards to COVID. It's not good though. The news that we're hearing every day, there's more deaths, there's more, rising cases, there's individual stories which, absolutely heart-wrenching. And in that climate, it does make it difficult for clubs to start having discussions about, we're going to show some ambition, we're going to try and make 3 or 4 signings, we're going to really make that jump for the Champions League, we're going to start, splash out and really invest.
There are loads of implications there. It's like if you're furloughing workers and then you're spending large amounts of money, if you are spending amounts of money on transfer fees, but you're taking tax holidays for certain amounts, that reliefs that the government and HMRC have suggested as well. So, yeah, I think that the point, and I've been chatting to a few people inside and outside the industry as well, which is I think there might be a point in the transfer window where there's almost like a recalibration of the value of transfers. It's almost like a couple of seasons ago we saw the sort of Mbappe and Neymar season, where almost in a way there was such large transfer fee inflation as a result of those two transfers. Like that was then the new benchmark, and then everything flowed from that.
So how will players' values be affected by the footballing hiatus? Global auditing company KPMG looked at 2 potential outcomes. In scenario 1, the season would be cancelled completely. In the second, games will be played behind closed doors. Based on their calculations, the most valuable player in the world is PSG star Kylian Mbappe, and his value of €225 million has gone down by 21.5%, partly due to the cancellation of the Ligue 1 season.
He's the one really that you'd look at and say, who is the next player who's going to become that player? The Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar was, you could argue Neymar is sort of in that conversation. He's probably a rung below, but so is everyone. But who's going to buy him this summer? Real Madrid, it's a massive ask. Real Madrid have been at the epicenter, obviously, of this crisis. The La Liga is making tentative steps towards coming back, but I think it's a long way from normality. La Liga, Premier League clubs, you've got Manchester City, you've got FFP and UEFA sanctions hanging over them. You've got Liverpool. I think Liverpool will be pretty conservative. That's the feeling I get from this. Where would someone like him go? I think the only answer would probably be Real Madrid, but I can't see it this summer. And I think it would take a sort of a surprising return for football, a surprisingly smooth return for football, with the Champions League coming back and, Euro 2021 going ahead and those kinds of things. I think it would take that to even think about someone like Mbappe going for, let's just pluck a figure out, £150 million next summer. I think it's fanciful at this moment in time.
In August 2016, Manchester United broke the world transfer record, re-signing Paul Pogba from Juventus for £89 million. Few would have expected the next time the record would be broken would be only 12 months later for £200 million when PSG signalled their intent for the future, capturing Brazilian forward Neymar from Barcelona.
When PSG broke that, it was as much a statement of intent as it was about signing the player or the money itself. It was them saying, look, we're at the top table now, we want to be winning the Champions League. Could we give it X number of years and see another team needing to make that statement and put themselves in that conversation as well?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, you look, don't you, you think, who are the clubs really that are queuing up? I suppose you could say, let's say 2 years' time. Probably not now, given the lack of match day revenue. But Tottenham was sort of building towards being that because they built a new stadium and they wanted to become that sort of move into the top level. Everton were in a similar position where obviously they're planning a new stadium. How is that all affected? They were really ambitious. They've spent a lot of money obviously to get Carlo Ancelotti. You look at Leicester, all but assured of being in the Champions League. Newcastle, another one, in the midst of a takeover from Saudi Arabia, potentially could have a lot of money to spend. Although we don't know yet how that's going to play out, but you can see that there would be some clubs that might, if they can get through the worst of this, might be in a better position than some others, to sort of ride it out and take advantage of it, because you would have to expect there will be some weakening. There'll be squads will be getting smaller. There will be, players getting older. That does lead to a weakening of the established order. So it will be very interesting to see whether there's any of them sort of what you call a second tier clubs who might just sense a chance and think, do you know what, it might just be worth a little gamble. One interesting point that I spoke to a couple of agents, including Nick Robinson, who works for a number of clients across Europe, and that they did speak about the idea that you might get a player that people were expecting to go for a lot of money, say a Lautaro Martinez from Serie A, or Jadon Sancho from the Bundesliga, or a Kai Havertz, and they were linked with sort of 80-90 million pounds. And if you get that one of those players moving for sort of 40 or 50 million or even less, I do think there will be a couple of players that will go this summer that have been linked for X amount of money and will go for a lot less, because I think some clubs will just have to sell. I've spoken to a few agents, a few people within the game who've said that they think it'll be a temporary sort of, maybe a one summer sort of blip, and then it'll level back out pretty swiftly, potentially to next summer. Do you see that, or can you see this having longer lasting impact on the way clubs are run, the way the transfer market works?
I think it will definitely have a long-term impact. I think what this has done is exposed how vulnerable clubs are to, any downturn. And I think there'll be more responsible running of the clubs. There'll always be that competitive side of very wealthy owners to try and win competitions, win the league, get promotion, etc., etc. So I do see there being a semblance of a return to normality, but I think that fiscally, financially, structurally, I think there'll be changes that will last way beyond one window.
Things like financial fair play, we've seen that taken advantage of in some situations. We've seen it, moved and adjusted over the last few years. Do you see things like that? Maybe the transfer window itself, changing in terms of its logistics.
We know already there's going to be clubs that are going to lose a lot of money if the games are played behind closed doors or cancelled. It will be even worse. So, that has to be amended. I think they'll need to relax the cost control measures to allow wealthy owners to inject money into the business without being concerned that they're going to be hit by sanctions. I think also there could be some structural reform, although it remains to be seen what shape that takes, but possibly extra solidarity payments by the Premier League clubs to the EFL clubs. But then there'd be conditionality attached to that. For example, increased ratios to revenue caps, future financial documentation provided with greater scrutiny or greater penalties. And in terms of the transfer window, it will have to move because it's very unlikely that it will open when it's supposed to open. There's talk of keeping it open until January, but I guess nothing's off the table currently.
Looking at the landscape at the moment, it does seem quite bleak. So if we're trying to find some silver lining in all this, is it that clubs on a wider scale might stop spending so much money and look inward and start bringing more young players through?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is one that I've spoken to a few people actually who've brought that up as an issue, and it is something that, I mean, you take the example around the time when Germany was in crisis, German football was in crisis at sort of the end of the 90s into the 2000s, and there was this real sort of what happened. And one of the things that, you know, clubs, countries, organisations do, if they do it well, is they look inwards, and like you say, and they think, well, okay, maybe we can't go and buy in the talent that's going to make that gap. What else can we do? Can we put a youth system in place? Can we give our manager a little bit longer? Can we stop, sacking managers when they've had five draws and a defeat at the start of the season? Do we give them a bit more patience? Again, there'll be other clubs, or there will be some clubs, that are far better placed than others in that regard because they've done that long term. I think Liverpool would be a good example. I think Chelsea, Manchester City would be good examples of that. Strong youth systems in terms of developing players. Not always use those players. They've sometimes used those players for sales or to bring money in. But I think you might see some of those clubs benefiting even more from having players in the first team.
Change comes around because of crises, and unfortunately we're in the midst of a crisis right now. It happened, and it's not obviously nowhere near the same scale. It happened with a change to the Premier League regulations when Portsmouth went into administration, and the Premier League put in place the equivalent of the UEFA FFP rules, slight differences in that. It was the same when the Tevez and Mascherano example happened, and then the Premier League brought in third-party ownership rules, etc. And I can certainly see there being more of an appetite for a wider discussion about, for example, wage caps or further salary caps as a percentage of revenues, or particular hard or soft amounts.
It might be a way of reconnecting with supporters in that regard as well. I think a lot of big clubs, I think they underestimate how much fans love to see homegrown players coming through. So I think you might see a little bit of that. And also, I think it might competitively, it might aid a little bit in terms of having smaller squads, making it a little bit more balanced, a little bit more even. You're not looking at Manchester City's reserve team, for example, and thinking, well, okay, that's worth £500 million, and they're playing against, Bournemouth team that's first team and can get nowhere near it. So I think there might be some competitive advantages or competitive good things that could come out of this. But I think, they are outweighed by the negative side. But I think if I was a young player at a Premier League club in the next couple of years, maybe coming 17, 18, I would be thinking maybe I might be getting a few more chances than I would at the moment.